We'll look at this short story, A Horse and Two Goats by R.K. Narayan. Uh, Before we even go into the short story, it will be important to think about the 1920s and the 30s, the time when Narayan and his other contemporaries bring in a very important phase in Indian writing English, and we have already spoken about various phases of Indian writing English, and this phase is very crucial because Narayan, along with Raja Rao, Mulk Raj Anand, and others, uh, changed the nature of Indian writing English itself. And the 20s and the 30s are quite an interesting period itself because a lot of changes have happened by this time in the urban centers of India and as well as many progressive parts of Indian states. There are more prosperous and progressive Indians, as well as there are many English educated English educated professionals. People have started to pursue careers like medicine, engineering, and journalism, education, law, and many of them are also part of the government. You have many products of modernity that have come across, products like cars, trains, bicycles. You have the telegraph, you have the photograph, you have the phonograph, the typewriter itself. Then you have also the industrial manufacturing, you have mass production, you have newspapers, magazines, books, and libraries by this time. And also by this time, 1920s and 30s, you have Gandhi on the national scene itself. And three of these writers, Raja Rao, Narayan, and Anand, they were deeply influenced by the Gandhian worldview. Gandhi as a figure of national movement, and also at this point of time there is a spectrum of left-wing politics that comes in from Fabian socialism to Leninist anti-imperialism and then Stalinist collectivism. All of that had attracted Indian intellectuals and activists itself. So what we see in the 1920s and 30s is that it's a far more diverse, fast-paced, more cosmopolitan space than India was before. So if you think about the writer before this that we read, Bankim, and if you compare him to someone like Mulk Raj Anand, the differences are quite vivid. So, in contrast to the high aesthetics aim of 19th century, many of the writers from the 20s and 30s, they were into the mimetic mode itself. And for them, realism was the key in their writing because it meant they were representing the life around them, what their societies were like, and that's why realism of two kinds, psychological as well as social realism, became the key features of their novels itself. And and I think Vinay Dharwadkar discerns a couple of characteristics of this time of this writing itself. Many other scholars have discerned different kind of characteristics because we are talking about Narayan specifically here, and from the 20s and 30s, I will be focusing mostly on Narayan through this short story, trying to read him as a representative figure. But generally itself, if you look at across three of them, the triumvirate insisted on authenticity as one of the primary characteristics. Therefore, what happened as a result of this search for authenticity is that most of their work was situated in the villages, the Indian village. And if one looks at Narayan's Malgudi, the famous small town based on his experiences of Mysore, one would see this relocation happening. And one would also see an movement and approach towards looking at ordinary characters, ordinary Indian human beings from official towns itself, right? So if one looks at the guide, the protagonist is a driver and a dancer. If one looks at Swami and his friends, again the character comes from a very ordinary walk of life. If one looks at Coolie, untouchable from Anand, one again looks at ordinary walks of life coming in. So one would have the attempt by these three writers was to represent India, and then we are reminded of Raja Rao's famous assertions in Kantapura, where he says how he remade English into an Indian language. So that remaking, realignment happens in the 1990s and 20s, where one sees how Indians grow comfortable about English without having those pangs as the earlier writers had about whether it will be able to carry the burden of Indianness. And Narayan seems to be one key protagonist in that march, or about in that march of English towards Indianness, because what you would see in him is the use of a very relaxed idiom of English. It pares it down to minimum. So he uses a very minimalistic style and draws a certain fluidity from the oral Indian storytelling method. A case in point is Narayan's Grandmother's Tale, which is a wonderful text, again enacting the distinction and the problems of translating the oral into the print itself. Some of those things we will also discuss here in the case of Horse and Two Goats. With Narayan, again, one sees in Grandmother's Tale, you would see that he tries to bring the tale into the folds of the novel, and the juxtaposition between a context-free and a context-sensitive system, because the tale is to be told in a specific way. It has specific relationships with the reader. It has a specific time of telling, even though the tale does not respect the linear time in that sense. All those problems come into the novel itself, and one sees that by the end of the novel itself has changed in nature. So it's a very important intervention that Narayan does, which also tells us of the strength, growing strength of Indian writing English, where they are comfortable in introducing those oral discourses. And as again the seminal intervention in Kantapura will happen, where Raja Rao will introduce the idea of the Sthala Purana, the myth of the place in that sense, to again complicate the space-time dialectic of novel itself. And then much like much like Narayan, he would also bring in that kind of a confidence, and where you start seeing how they are talking about the incursion of modernity from the outside world into their inner worlds. Guide explores it beautifully. Again, the road, the train, the vehicle, all objects of modernity, the paraphernalia of modernity, comes to inhabit this small town Malgudi, and how it kind of engenders anxiety. And there is a resolution at the end. Uh, uh, the other factor that one sees in the 20s and 30s writing, especially from these three writers, is the presence of nationalism and Gandhi. Gandhi is a presence in many of these writers. Kantapura itself is a Gandhian tale about coffee estates in South India and rebellion itself. And you will see that in Anand's famous discussions with Gandhi about the language in which he should write, and you will also see Gandhi being a presence in multiple novels and works of him. The Gandhian morality, the aesthetics of aesthetics itself, pervades much of the 20s and 30s writing. Narayan too is not insulated from it. Like Swami, even though is dismissed as a children's novel itself, Swadeshi and the discussions and the movements about it are there on the fringes, but it comes in very very important and significant ways into the narrative itself. On the other hand, you will also have a lot of cosmopolitan energies that are channeled into these writings also. All of us are aware of Anand's interactions and relationship with the Bloomsbury itself, where he would where he would discuss his ideas and worlds with the Bloomsbury writers, the high modernist itself, Anand's own interventions, and about which a lot of new scholarly work is happening right now about global modernism itself. As a participant of global modernism itself is very significant at this point of time, and also to think about not only their positions in the world where they were staying and living and where they were writing from, but also in terms of, for example, Graham Greene publishing Narayan, so that he was known in India, known in India. So you have, besides the ideas of, as I was talking about, the ideas of left-wing discourses coming in with Stalinism, collectivism, where you have also Leninism, you have Fabian socialism, all of this coming to characterize their world itself. Notably, in Narayan, all these worlds come into a balance, and the protagonist from the beginning, when the struggle or the conflict is announced, is constantly in a search and a push towards a reconciliation, a balance. The balance is what characterizes Narayan's world, and many scholars have described this idea of balance in Narayan and the wholeness that is there to his life, which will later become the hollowness in Rushdie's world itself. So, one of the scholars would say that this balance is possible in Narayan because his world is rooted in myth and tradition, despite the pulls and pushes, despite the conflicts that his characters have, thanks to modernity coming into a slow-paced traditional world. The balance is achieved at the end. That kind of a resolution is what makes Narayan look deceptively simple. His worlds are, uh, as I said, populated by very ordinary folk who are constantly trying to find a settled life. Uh, at the end, they do find a settlement or a resolution itself, but uh, that he's later criticized also about. Yes. So if one looks at, and then I've chosen this text for that reason to read it as the typical 20s, 30s world, which is marked by many of these discourses, the discourse of myth, tradition, modernity, the tension, and also to look at the push and pull of context free and context sensitive in that way. The story is quite hilarious. It takes place at this village called Kritam, as we are told, nondescript village by the highway. Uh, a person named Muni has two goats. Before he had a herd of goats and sheep, but due to bad times, he is only left with two. He's old and has only his wife with him. They have no children, for which they are mocked in the village. They are very poor, so they can't afford a lot more. The goats are the only things that they are left with. One day, like many other days, he goes to the highway, sits under the statue of a horse that is there, on which sits a warrior. It's by the roadside. An American foreigner comes and looks at the statue, is enamored by it, wants to buy it. To his sad luck, Muni does not know any English, can only speak in Tamil. What ensues is a comedy of errors of sorts, with the American talking English and Muni replying in Tamil, none of them understanding each other. Ultimately, for the foreigner, the American, to take the horse and give Muni 100 rupees, because he thought Muni was the rightful owner of the statue. Muni thought he was being paid to buy his goats, which he happily did for for a princely sum of 100 rupees, only to find out that the foreigner has not taken his goats. What the story enacts uh, is a discourse between English and Tamil, English and Indian languages, or as Professor Narayan would argue, would be about English as the language of business, English being used for a specific purpose which is not being able to do the work that it was intended to, which is to perform the business, because at the end, no business transaction takes place. If the white man, the foreigner, the American was trying to discuss buying from Muni, Muni himself is not the owner in the first place. Muni thought he was trying to buy the goats and happily accept the 100 rupees, but actually no transaction happens. So we are confronted with a very unique situation where English, which is supposedly the language of commerce, does not help with that specific part itself, that it is not the language of commerce in that sense. So therefore, we are caught in a very specific quandary where English inhabits Indian space with other languages, but somehow they are not able to talk to each other. Somehow Tamil and English are not able to talk to each other. Yet, in very interesting ways, the story is made up of that conversation itself. That the juxtaposition of English and Tamil. even when they are not making sense to each other, they are still talking. They are talking, sometimes talking over each other, sometimes talking so that we get to know them, and the entire conversation happens and is presented to us in English. Tamil is translated. The question therefore arises is, do Indian languages have to be translated so that they make sense to the outsider, the stranger itself? Should the stranger learn Indian languages? What happens when untranslatability becomes a major obstacle in trade? So, questions of translation and its role in imperial trade also are hinted at. That's why I said Narayan is deceptively simple, because many of these questions are thrown to us. Also comes the question of different traditions, different knowledge systems, the systems of context-free and context-sensitive worldviews. What happens when certain things that are context-sensitive are applied beyond those contexts? Those are the questions that we look at, and the funny situation that arises out of it.